Brian Little, and welcome back to the Realistic Practice Project, video number 3. In the last 2 videos, we have talked about how to make sure that your practice sessions reflected your values and what you are working on right now, what's the most important to you. And we use an Eisenhower matrix to do that. And we talked about how to schedule your week, your average week, so that practice could be a priority for you. So this week, we are going to talk about how to make those practice sessions as efficient as possible. If you're only practicing for 20 to 25 minutes at a time, which is what I actually recommend, I never practice more than 25 minutes at a time. I want to make sure you get the best possible outcomes in those practice sessions. You want to keep your brain engaged for the entirety of your practice session, which is why it should be shorter. And you also want to take a break after each practice session to allow your brain to do something else entirely. So I did some research, and I have been doing some research for a few years about how our brain learns and how we can practice in a way that works best for our brains. So I read this article by Usha Goswami in the Journal of the Philosophy of Education, and the article is titled Principles of Learning, Implications for Teaching, a Cognitive Neuroscience Perspective. And in this article, he talked about certain principles that this young field of cognitive neuroscience has discovered in their research. Hi, editing Dr. Little here. I've made a grave and terrible mistake. I've internalized patriarchy because Usha Goswami is a woman and I was using the pronoun he to describe her. Of course, Usha Goswami is a professor of cognitive developmental neuroscience at the University of Cambridge, a fellow of St. John's College, Cambridge, and the director of the Center for Neuroscience and Education Downing site. She's amazing, and I'm going to leave a link so you can learn all about her. And I'm very sorry, Dr. Goswami. Forgive me. So cognitive neuroscience just is the research on how our brain actually learns, okay? And some of these principles that Usha Goswami has discovered through his research are, number 1, learning is incremental and experience-based. As musicians, it feels like we should all know this. That's literally what we're doing every time we practice. We're making incremental progress, learning incrementally based on the experience that we have during our practice sessions. Here's a quote from that article. The brain develops fiber connections to encode each experience that we have into our nervous systems. It's fundamental when considering education. The growth of interconnected networks of simple cells distributed across the entire brain eventually results in a complex cognitive structure, such as language or causal knowledge. So learning a language has created a complex neurological structure inside of our brain. And learning music is the exact same thing. Learning music is like learning a language. Here's another quote. Learning is distributed across large networks of neurons, and so factors like the number of relevant neurons firing, their firing rates, the coherence of the firing patterns, and how clean they are for signaling the appropriate information will all vary depending on how the current environmental input activates the existing network. Okay, so learning is dependent across how different neurons are firing. I think this appears in our practice sessions by how are we consistently activating this neural network, this neural pattern, and how do we make sure that we activate it in a similar way every time, because that's how we're going to create learning of a specific movement/sound that we produce. Second principle, learning is multisensory. I think as musicians, we inherently know that as well. We are not just learning the notes on the page. We are learning a rhythm, how it feels. We are learning how our muscles are going to move. We are learning how to change how our muscles move. We're learning so many things at the same time, and we have physical senses, we have auditory senses and we have visual senses, all combined to help us learn the music that we are trying to learn. So from this article, if you're learning new information, use a variety of senses because the learning will be, quote, represented across a greater network of neurons, connecting a greater number of different neural structures and accessible via a greater number of modalities, end quote. So the more types of senses that we use in our learning, the more structures in the brain are going to be activated while we're learning, which is starting to be equated with stronger learning. So the third principle is brain mechanisms of learning extract structure from input. Okay, so quote, as the brain experiences particular sensory constellations of stimuli over multiple times, what is common across all these experiences will naturally be represented more strongly than what is different. This is why we try to repeat things in our practice in the same way. My students hear me do this all the time. They probably get very annoyed with me. We work on a little passage, they get it right. We celebrate. Yes, that was it. Do it again. They get it right again. Yes, you nailed it. That was awesome. Do it again. Because we want to play it more times correctly than incorrectly. By doing it correctly more times, these fiber connections in our brain are going to encode what is common in our memory, what has happened more times, and that will be stronger than anything that was kind of an offshoot, right? Something that was novel, new, a mistake you hadn't made before. The consistency is what our brain is looking for. So if you have practiced something 5 or 6 times and you get it right once, you've actually practiced 5 times incorrectly. And your brain is just going, well, that's what we've done most often. That was what was more consistent. So this must be the direction I'm supposed to go. We have to tell our brain what needs to be remembered. And we do that with repetition, correct repetition. The fourth principle, learning is social. Learning with others is generally more effective than learning alone. This is kind of why we have teachers. We have private teachers in the music community. We can do group practice sessions. We can have studio class. Things like this will help you learn a bit better. Children learn by watching adult and older humans. That's how they first start to learn. And we can still embrace that form of learning as we get to young adulthood, by trying to learn as a group. The fifth principle, this is a long one. Cortical learning can be modulated by phylogenetically older systems. This one confused me at first. But I think if you break that down into layman's terms, it just means that the part of our brain that is active when learning information also takes activity from older parts of our brains. So this just means that parts of our brain that are active when learning information can interact with older parts of our brain that are involved in more emotional processing. So this means that learning under stress as adults can impair our learning abilities. Shocker. Complete shocker. So a quote from the article, learning in adults is impaired when the impact of punishment relevant to reward is enhanced, and the neurotransmitters that control this process can be identified. So our emotions matter when learning. We don't learn as well when we are upset, when we are angry, when we are experiencing negative emotions, when we are in our fight or flight response. So we need to learn how to deal with our emotions in a healthy way and be able to acknowledge them and move past them and continue learning. And sometimes that means that maybe we need to take a break from the flute, from the trumpet, from singing, from whatever your instrument is, and walk away from it for a little bit and then come back later when you have been able to express your emotions, get through your emotions, come out the other side, and you're ready to try again. And the sixth principle in this article is just that learning shows lifelong plasticity and compensation. You can learn forever. You can learn forever. You can learn your entire life, from birth until death. It's not just birth until age 25 when they say that the brain finally finishes developing. We can continue to learn throughout the entirety of our lives. So here are the 6 things that I want to encourage you to do to make your practice sessions as efficient and effective as possible. Number 1, make a plan of attack. You don't need to map out every single thing you're going to do. But the more planning you do in advance, the more real work you can complete inside of that practice session. So if you can give yourself 10 minutes of planning and 15 minutes of practice, that's great. If you can give yourself 5 minutes of planning, 25 minutes of practice, it doesn't matter. Just pick what you're going to do before you set the timer for your practice session. You could pick your piece, etude, whatever fundamentals you're working on. You could pick the measures that you're working on rather than the entire piece. You don't need to work on the entire piece every single time. And if you have 15 minutes, you can break everything down into smaller and smaller pieces. Is there something specific that you want to accomplish in those small pieces? Is there a specific metronome marking you're working towards? Do you want to feel more comfortable with the tricky fingering? Do you want to be able to hit a note without cracking or splitting? What's your goal? And how can you work towards that goal with a small chunk in a small amount of time? Okay, the next thing that I truly believe you should do to make your practice sessions much more effective and efficient is set a timer. Your brain works so much better in short amount of time. Okay, it cannot focus for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. I truly believe that 25 minutes is about the maximum before your brain starts going, what are we going to have for dinner today? What did we have for lunch? What was that thing that I was supposed to do? It's just what your brain does. Why fight against it? Let's work with it. Shorter practice session. You could, let's say you have 10 minutes and you want to work on this really technically complicated segment. Your goal for that practice session, you're going to set a timer for 10 minutes and you're going to say, I'm going to play this technically complicated section in 7 different ways in 10 minutes in order to increase my comfort level. Okay? In 15 minutes, I'd like to play this new tone exercise with a beautiful, richly resonant sound that has a singing quality. Set your timer for 15 minutes and do just that. Don't do anything else. When your timer goes off, walk away. You're done. The third thing I would encourage you to do to make your practice sessions effective and efficient is to enjoy smaller practice sessions. 10 minutes is amazing. It's amazing. You can use 10 minutes so efficiently, but you have to go back to number 1 and you have to plan ahead. But don't be beating yourself up because you only have 10 or 15 minutes today. That's fantastic. You have 10 or 15 minutes today. Pick something you want to get better at in those 10 or 15 minutes. And I bet if you do a really focused practice session for that amount of time, you're going to get better at it. That's just how it works. Okay. The fourth thing, I believe you should practice for your performance. So I've been working with a lot of my students this year for this particular thing. In my studio, we have a couple different types of performances. We have studio class once a month where students can get up and play things for feedback from me. We work together as a studio on fundamentals exercises. And then at the end of every semester, my students have the opportunity to perform a piece of repertoire on the end of semester recital. So the pieces that they will be performing like that are going to be played from the beginning to the end with no stops. So it is important to practice that piece in that manner at some point. Usually at least 4 weeks prior to the performance, I encourage my students, okay, it's time to start practice runs where you go from beginning to end and you do not stop no matter what happens. Then there are other things that my students do. And these are all region and all state auditions. The etudes that the students are required to play for all region and all state are never asked to be performed from beginning to end. Whenever they arrive at all region and all state, a specific segment will be given to them and they will have to perform that segment. That segment could be 2 measures, it could be 5 measures. It's going to be short because this year at Allstate there were 108 flutists auditioning for not very many spots. So for those particular etudes, we never practiced them straight through because we were practicing for the performance. And the performance was never going to be start at the beginning and play to the end. It was always going to be play a segment. So what we did is we basically chunked things out. Okay, some of the etudes were about 10 lines long, so we did 2 lines at a time. This is back in the fall. And we numbered all of those lines. So on day 1 of their practice week, they would play all the number 1s, day 2 the number 2s, day 3 the number 3s, and then they would go back to number 1s whenever they got through all of that. Or they divided it up in some other way. So they were never actually playing through the entire etude every single day. And then, as we got closer to actual audition time, we went through and we chose the sections that we thought would probably be most likely to be chosen. And I was dead on. Every single section that I thought was most likely to be chosen was chosen. Okay? So we numbered those sections that we thought were most likely. Number 1. Every day you hit number 1s. And then we went and found sections that were probably next most likely. Those were number 2s. You tried to hit number 2s almost as much as number 1s, but if you only have 15 minutes, you concentrate on number 1s. And then the rest of the etude was usually number 3. If you have a good long practice session, you have multiple sessions that day, definitely hit the number 3s. But those were usually segments that at that point my students had already learned really, really well. We weren't that worried about. And I was, like I just said, I was right. I was right on everything that I thought might be chosen. And my students did really well. They did really, really well. They did fantastic at their all-region auditions. And the 4 that were eligible to audition for Allstate all are in Allstate. So practice it how you're going to perform it. It doesn't matter if you play a piece from beginning to end. It just doesn't matter. Why is that important if that's not actually how you're going to perform the piece? Now people might argue with me on this. They might argue, but I think you should practice how you should perform. Now, those are the only etudes that we usually do that type of practice with, because other etudes we do kind of 1 per week. We learn what the etude is about, what it's trying to get us to do, what it's trying to help us learn, and then we move on to the next one. But these etudes are for a very particular purpose, so we practice in a very particular way that supports how you will have to perform it. And they were so prepared this year. They did so well. I am so proud of all of them because they bought in to this concept, they prepared diligently, and they really, really did well. And they all accomplished their goal, which was to make Allstate this year. So I'm very proud of them. Proud teacher moment. Okay, the 5th piece of advice I have in order to make practice sessions effective and efficient is to record yourself. Sometimes your ears can deceive you. And they can deceive you in multiple ways. They can make you think that you sound terrible when you actually don't sound terrible. And they can reveal things that you're doing that you didn't realize you were doing that you might want to correct. So recording yourself is very important. You don't ever have to keep the recordings. Okay? Like if you're concerned about listening back to yourself, you can listen, make a note, and then delete it. You don't have to continue to keep it or listen to it if you don't want to. But get used to recording yourself and listening back and pretend that it's somebody else that you're listening to and you have to give them some comments about what they could possibly improve and what they're already doing really well. I think you'll find that helps make your practice sessions much more efficient. Okay, and the 6th thing that you can do to help make your practice sessions more effective and efficient is keep a practice journal. This one has always been very challenging for me. I am not a journal person. I don't like journaling. I never have. But this can be something really, really simple, like keep track of just what you worked on, especially if you're breaking things up. If you're breaking things up into specific measures, into lines, you might want to just write down what you were working on that day so that you know where to start the next day. Or this could be a true journal if you really enjoy journaling. You can write down what you were feeling that day. You can do a little bit more in-depth emotional investigation into your practice session. And that's fantastic. Do whatever you want to do. You could keep track of some patterns. Maybe you want to kind of keep track of how foods are making you feel. Did you practice after you ate something really, really salty and you noticed something? So something like that. So a practice journal can be as simple as just writing down what I did. Tomorrow I'm going to start here. To this is how much sleep I got. This is what I ate. And this is how I think it affected my practice session. And here's what my emotions were today. It can be anywhere in between, but just keeping track of things can just help you see patterns that you might not know were happening. And I'm going to give you a bonus one. Here's my 7th tip for effective and efficient practice sessions. Get some sleep. Go to bed. Prioritize getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night. Please, please. So according to Usha Goswami's article that I was referencing earlier, quote, empirical studies of learning finger tapping sequences show that there is improvement in this learned skill after sleep, with performance levels after sleep that are significantly higher than performance levels at the end of initial training before sleep occurred. However, sleep has to occur within a certain time window after training in order for benefits to accrue. This time window is approximately within 16 hours of the learning period. So if you are doing really focused and really efficient practice during the day, and then you get good sleep at night, your brain is learning things while you are sleeping. This is when your brain is creating and storing memory. So if you want your practice sessions to go from short-term memory into long-term memory, you want to feel like you've gone from I'm kind of learning this to this feels comfortable, you have to prioritize sleep. You just have to. It's good for you. It feels great. Go to sleep. So, if you'd like to read the article that I've been referencing in this video, I'm going to leave all the information about that in the description box below, so please check it out. There are a lot of other references to other articles at the end of this particular article, which I'm going to be taking a deep dive into very shortly, I'm sure. So after viewing the first 3 videos of the Realistic Practice Project, you should be able to 1. Make an Eisenhower matrix to show yourself what music and exercises are most important and urgent to you right now. Number 2, plan your average week of practice sessions that fit into your average schedule without having to sacrifice sleep or food. And 3, plan your practice sessions using the concepts we just talked about to make sure that each practice session is as effective and efficient as it can possibly be. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have, please leave a like on this video and consider leaving a comment so we can keep the discussion going below. And if you would please consider subscribing to my channel so you won't miss the next video in the Realistic Practice Project series, I would appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching. Happy practicing. Right, Penny? Penny. She says happy practicing.